Let's go. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm happy to welcome you all to the third part of the Catapult Hockey webinar series. My name is Markus Blumquist. I'm working as a sports scientist and a customer success specialist for Catapult. And today I have the honor being the moderator of this webinar. So as you all probably already know, this webinar series is all about technology and innovation within hockey performance monitoring. We already had two parts within the 2021 webinar series, and the first two parts have been focusing mostly on the integration of wearables and like the on-ice training monitoring. Today, we're going to direct our focus a little bit more towards off-ice training, if you want to say, and especially velocity-based training. So let me give you a brief overview about the upcoming 60 minutes together. So I'm going to start with a short introduction of our speakers, Barry and Cedric. And after that, I will hand over to Cedric, and they will take the main part of this session. At the end, we're going to have some time for Q&A, so please feel free to put any questions you might have into the Q&A section, and we will pick them up at the end of the session. So now to our speakers. So let's start with Cedric Unholz. Cedric has a background as a professional rugby player. He has a master's degree in strength and conditioning and has been working with the Scottish Rugby Union and the Munster Rugby Academy as a strength and conditioning coach. In terms of hockey, Cedric has been working with the Buffalo Sabres in the NHL and the Rochester Americans in the AHL, being involved in the strength and conditioning training there. So at the moment, or right now, Cedric is working as a sports scientist or sports science manager for PUSH. And furthermore, he's training Olympic windsurfers and watermen and women in the Dominican Republic. Cedric is going to talk about technology and wearables within velocity-based training in order to give you a good understanding about how this may look like, how it works, and what is possible. And Barry is then having a stronger focus on the practical implementation of velocity-based training within hockey. So Barry Budd is the founder of Premier Strength and Conditioning Incorporate in Edmonton, Alberta, where he lives as well. So he has been working with athletes for more than 20 years now with a strong focus on elite and professional hockey players. So his prospects are like NHL players, drafted NHL players, Olympic gold medalists, and as I have read, more than 100 elite junior hockey players as well. So when it comes to velocity-based training, Barry has already been implementing it like in some form already like 15 years ago. Over the past 4 years, he implemented even like technology more and more into his velocity-based training programs. So welcome, Barry. Welcome, Cedric. Again, it's a real honor to have you on this webinar with your expertise and your amazing background. And with that said, I would like to hand it over to Cedric and to Barry. So Cedric, the stage is yours.
Cool. Thanks very much, Marcus, and thanks for the great introduction. Welcome, everyone. Obviously, thanks for joining us. So like mentioned, as Marcus mentioned, so I work as a sports science manager for PUSH. So I'm going to be outlining the PUSH technology, some of the capacities and the abilities of the technology with relation to providing velocity-based training support. And then Barry's going to be talking about the actual practical application of velocity-based training in ice hockey. So just to kind of give you guys a bit of an idea of what we're going to be doing, a bit of a roadmap for the presentation. Here's a bit of the content page. Obviously, I'm going to be outlining the PUSH system in general, and then going through the individual components. And then obviously Barry's going to take it away with all the practical application information. So just to start from a PUSH perspective, a bit of a mission statement. Our mission is to push human performance through technology. And what we really do, what we aim to provide is a one-stop shop system that supports coaches in managing their athletes' training from A to Z. So be it planning training, tracking training, assessing it, and obviously with the ultimate goal to improve output in the weight room and athlete performance with real-time feedback. So this is kind of this is an overview of the one-stop system. So we call this our 360-degree solution. So pretty much like every component from training management to training prescription is covered between the integrated hardware and software system that we provide. So to kind of take you a bit through the flow, we would do the programming in our online training system, which is called Portal. We would do the training with the app and with the hardware, with the push band itself. The data is automatically collected within the app, and as athletes go through their repetitions in the weight room, and then the reporting is obviously done off the back of this data collection in the online system again. So that's where all the analysis takes place. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the components just now. So the question here is, how do we achieve this 360-degree solution? So as I mentioned, it's an integrated software and hardware platform, which is comprised of three main components. So the first one is the hardware itself, the Band 2.0. We can track over 500 plus exercises with it, and we have a variety of different capabilities and features within the app itself. That we can do with the technology itself. The second part then is the app that is paired together with the band. And this is what you would use as the live display within the training environment and to feedback data to your athletes during the training session. We do this by using real-time velocity-based training data and metrics, and it's the platform, so the app is available both on iOS and Android. The last component then is the portal, so our online training management system. So in here we can create and schedule workouts, we can analyze performance, and we can basically do everything that we need to in terms of athlete and data management. So these three components are seamlessly integrated with each other, and obviously the data collected is fed automatically between the app and the portal. So before we move on to kind of looking at a little bit more detail around the individual components, I just wanted to include some key validation references that are important to look at, if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the technology and the validation around it. So we pride ourselves on having technology that's heavily validated, and it's shown to be a reliable means to measure what's important to coaches from a velocity-based training perspective. So not just for lifting, but also for movements such as jumping. So to dive into the individual components, we first look at the hardware, so the pushband 2.0. So as mentioned, it's an externally validated inertial measurement unit, IMU for short, and the hardware is comprised of a 3D gyroscope and a 3D accelerometer with a sampling frequency of 1000 hertz. The battery itself, the battery life is about 30 hours of continuous motion recording. So obviously heaps and heaps of time. You can get through a huge number of sessions before having to recharge the unit. So the app connection, or the band to app connection, is actually achieved through Bluetooth. So even if you have Wi-Fi that comes out in your training facility, you'll never get data loss. All the data will always be captured because the actual connection is Bluetooth as opposed to internet connection. So the app itself has a large range of features, but from an applied perspective, we really provide kind of three major outcomes to the training environment. So the first one is increasing output and intent levels with real-time feedback of both peak and average velocity, but also the same for power as well. So the interesting thing here is, it's been shown that the absolute outputs per repetition are actually increased through live feedback as opposed to repetitions that don't have live feedback. So obviously that's a major component and a major piece of our system. The second part then is detailed post-set analysis options. So this isn't just to display what's been done in a set or the outputs that were achieved in repetitions, but it's also to help support coach-athlete communication. So it just gives that additional angle of dialogue, not only to support the relationship between the coach and athlete, but also to help help both parties have a really informed, objective way in order to guide loading prescription. And that kind of leads to that third point of guiding daily order regulation with load prescription using velocity-based training metrics. So that could be anything from setting a target velocity over which a coach would like an athlete to perform all their reps over, or using things like velocity loss cutoff ranges, so that we know that we're always working in between the ranges that stimulate certain strength qualities that we're looking to target. So the second major aspect of the app is our testing suite, which allows for efficient and effective testing of 1RMs and jumps. So I've just listed our testing suite, our testing suite portfolio just now on this slide. So we've got submaximal 1RM tests for the squat and bench and for the deadlift. So this is achieved through linear regression. So effectively what we do is we take, we do repetitions from 45 to 80% of an estimated 1RM. And through the velocities achieved at those repetitions, with linear regression calculation, we can actually get a 1RM estimation without having to take an athlete to a maximal load. So we're seeing this to be very, very popular and effective in-season training situations, or if, for example, if an athlete is coming back from injury and a strength coach wants to find out where they're at in terms of maximal strength in a safe way, they can do so without necessarily taking that athlete to a maximal load. As mentioned, we obviously have a lot of jump testing incorporated into our system, counter and non-counter movement jump tests, as well as reactive strength index or RSI testing variants too. And you'll probably be able to see on the displays, in terms of jumping, it's not just jump height that we provide, but we also provide things such as peak takeoff velocity and peak power outputs as well. So our system is designed to provide full administration coverage. So by this, we save coaches time and give the ability to adapt to any training prescription needs within their environment. So this is achieved in a couple of different ways, but really on the floor in the app. The main kind of components that allow us to achieve this is being able to access pre-scheduled sessions that have been designed and scheduled in Portal for the athlete. But we also have the option to kind of build as we train. Okay, so even if nothing's pre-scheduled, an athlete or a coach can kind of build their workout as they train on the app, and everything that's collected, as well as the entire session structure, is then fed back to Portal. So you can't have the best of both worlds in that sense. The other major component is that every single exercise and every single movement can include coaching cues, custom instructions, and videos. So, even if you're training an athlete remotely, or if the coach isn't there in the facility, an athlete can not only view videos and view technical instructions as to how to properly perform the exercise, but obviously all the information that they jot down is automatically fed back to the coach within the Portal account as well. And lastly, there's full editing capabilities from both sides. So not only program adjustment on the Portal side, so on the online training management software side, but also, for example, on the day, if something's been pre-scheduled, the athlete, they just had a game or they just had a training session and they can't do a specific exercise that's been scheduled, they're able to quickly adjust and quickly replace an exercise and obviously edit things like loads and stuff as well. So this links us nicely with the Portal platform. And so I'll kind of be going through the three main overarching abilities of Portal just now. So the first part then is the programming piece. In Portal, we have an intuitive program builder called Block Builder. So in this, we can obviously design our programs, create phases, create training blocks, and also put together custom training components which we can then drag and drop into the planner. So not only does this allow for fast program creation, but we also have a very fast scheduling process. So everything that you create within Portal, you would save in the directory within Portal. You can then push or you can send that and schedule it to your athlete, which they can then access on their phone or their tablet. So really, as mentioned, we're able to schedule complete training sessions and blocks with a variety of training components inherent to them. So as mentioned, each component of our system is seamlessly integrated with one another. So that means there's no manual data entry necessary as such. So, everything that the athlete completes or performs in the weight room is automatically fed up to the online software, which means that not only do we save time through automatic data collection, but it's very, very easy then to visualize and filter the different graphs that we provide for very quick reporting or instant reporting. Even as the session is running. And we also have the ability then to analyze long-term progression with these dynamic reporting graphs. Lastly, then, the third major aspect of the portal platform is our leaderboards feature. Excuse me. So this essentially provides an additional feedback angle to meaningfully improve training and training outcomes. So the way that we achieve this is through kind of like a combine style display, which has real-time updating rankings, which displays any metric that the band can collect. So both in terms of absolute and relative metrics across all exercises and tests. And ultimately what we achieve with this is we help drive competition both within and between the athlete, regardless of environment or location, and just making sure that every single athlete and every single individual actually gives their best. So obviously from a training environment and from a training motivation standpoint, it's an enormous and a very, very powerful addition to the weight room environment. So now that we've done a bit of an overview over the system itself, I'm going to hand it over to Barry. And yeah, thanks very much for listening so far.
Perfect. Thanks, Cedric. So today I'm basically going to give you a little bit of an overview of how we implement velocity-based training into our program. So I'll give you a little bit of an idea of who I work with and kind of the time frame that we work with. I don't work with a specific team, so I do off-season training primarily. We'll do some in-season stuff with some of our athletes, but primarily we see our athletes in their hockey off-season from April to September. So we get to implement an entire off-season program using velocity-based training. So I'll talk about who we implement it with. We don't use it with every single one of our athletes to its full capabilities. So our U15 athletes, these are younger kids learning to train, learning to lift. We usually with them, we'll introduce push and introduce velocity-based training with them more from just using it to measure their jumps standpoint. With some of our older athletes, so they get a little bit older, they get a little bit more experienced, we start implementing it a little bit more. We'll use, again, the jump testing, and we'll use the squat and bench press testing that's in the app, but we'll also do some other testing using velocity that's not done directly in the app for testing. The reason we don't really use it a lot with our younger athletes is just technique. They're just not consistent enough with their lifting yet to implement it on a daily basis. We'll use it occasionally with them. With our U16 athletes, they're getting a little bit better at lifting, technically a little bit better. As the summer goes on or as the off season goes on and they're getting better, we will start using it maybe in the later phases of training. Then with our U18 junior and pro athletes, full on, they use it every single day. We'll program measure velocities for every single workout. So in the next slide, we'll talk about kind of how we use it as a baseline testing. So first thing I want to know with my athletes is where they're at the beginning, and then we can monitor that and measure that throughout the summer. The beauty of using the push band for velocity-based training is we can measure that on a daily basis as well and see how athletes are adjusting or adapting to training and how we might need to make changes to their program. But some of the baseline testing that we'll do, I like to create a load velocity profile for my athletes. So although within the app, we can use the squat testing or the deadlift testing or the bench press testing that's in there, I don't use it that way. I basically create a spreadsheet and create a profile, and I'll show you that in a second here. And I'll test back squats or front squats, depending on the athlete, bench press and pull-ups. And with pull-ups, we do pull-ups weighted. So we get an actual 1 rep max for them. We don't do it for 20 reps, 30 reps. I just don't see the need in that. So we're looking at it as a strength measure as well. For vertical jump testing, although the push band has the capability of doing a number of different types of tests, the 3 that we use with our hockey athletes are squat jumps, counter movement jump, arm swing, so more of a stretch reflex, and then the 10-5 RSI stiffness, so more of a reactive strength index. What we find with hockey players, the RSI is not that great for them. They have a big ground contact time when they skate, so they don't react off the ground all that quick. But does it mean not? It's still something we want to get better at and we want to improve just to build athleticism. So what we see with most of our hockey athletes is their squat jump is really good, their counter movement jump is decent, and their RSI stiffness is usually their weakest quality. Now, obviously depends on the athlete. So moving on to the next slide. Well, so this is an example of a load velocity profile that we would create for an athlete. And this is a back squat example. So the highlighted yellows they wouldn't have actually done those lifts. So what we do is we basically do 5 sets of anywhere from 1 to 3 reps. What we're looking for here is their best rep velocity on each set. So don't care how much they drop off, don't care what their second or third set is or their worst set is. We care about their best rep. So what are their best, their best rep. So for example, with this athlete here, you can see the velocities that they moved at different loads, and then we'll just predict their 1 rep max from this. The big issue we have with a lot of our athletes is a lot of hockey players in general is they get into their season. Their seasons are very long. They play a lot of games. They have a lot of travel. They don't lift a lot during the season. And if they do, it's lighter maintenance type work. So their ability to express a 1RM and express heavy lifting is not very good. A lot of these guys are pretty good at moving submaximal weights, but very poor at moving maximal loads. So the nice thing about this is we don't ever need to do a 1 rep max with these guys. I don't care what they can squat. What I care about is having a number to work off of, so I can get an idea of what percentage to give them in their training for programming. Another thing to point out here with this chart is every lift has a minimal velocity threshold. So in here, it's 0.23 for this athlete. Now that's really low, and we know what that is because we've actually seen this particular athlete do this. But a minimal velocity threshold would be the lowest velocity you can move a weight at. So if I move a weight, if this particular athlete moves a squat at 0.23, I know he's not doing another rep. Now 0.23, like I said, is very low. Generally for squats is about 0.25 to 0.3, but this guy's a grinder. He can grind out weights pretty good. So you can see that we get a lot of data from here. So we can programming percentages. I know what his 80% is, what weight it is, also what velocity he moves it at. So I can make adjustments to my training programs based on that. So each of our athletes would have one of these profiles for all 3 of the lifts that we talked about. So in the next slide, we'll show how we do the exact same thing for a bench press, so we can get an idea. Another thing I'll point out here too, it's nice to have a 1 rep max, but it's really important too for a lot of these athletes to see how much they improve moving submaximal loads. So what we'll see is this profile change over time. So maybe their 1 rep max won't go up a lot, but their ability to move a load at 0.4, 0.5 meters per second will really start to increase, which obviously would be, if we looked at the linear regression, would be an increase in 1 rep max as well. But their ability to create power is equally as important as strength. So it's another thing that we get to see here as well. So in the next slide, we'll talk about so this is a chart that I kind of use to program off of. So we can see here, this is general, studies done on a number of athletes just to create a general idea of what percentage equates to what velocity for specific exercises. So you see squats, deadlifts, hip thrusts here. I'll use it for trap bar deadlifts. And I find with trap bar deadlifts, we're somewhere in between a squat and a deadlift. Single leg work, split squats, Bulgarian squats, things like that are very similar to our squat velocities at various percentages. But you'll also see that by creating a profile for each athlete, it might not match up to exactly what this is, but I can use their profile to give them an idea. So in training, I might say, I want you to move at 0.5 meters per second for your best rep. We look back at their profile and see what weight they did at 0.5 and try to work off that as a guideline. In the next slide, you'll see that there's same chart for bench press, overhead pressing, pull-ups. So we can use this as a guideline to help design our programs. With our jump testing, so this is how we kind of implement our jump testing. In the next slide, we'll show you how we, looking back at this before we get onto the jump testing, just comparing a before and after squat for an athlete. So if we look at this is the same athlete that I showed you earlier. So May 27th, this was his profile that we created for him. So all the ones in white, he would have actually done those lifts and got a velocity. We put in his minimum velocity threshold at the beginning at 0.3. I use that for every athlete until we get a chance to see them actually perform close to a 1 rep max. Maybe it's in training, maybe it's in testing, and get an idea of what their minimum velocity is. So you can see how this athlete would have improved from 300 pounds to 345 pounds from May 27th to August 31st. But we can also see how at different loads he went up. So if you look at 285 pound squat at 0.3 meters per second in May, in August, that 285 pound squat, he moved at 0.5 meters per second. So pretty significant increase in his ability to push hard and just have that intent in his lift at those heavier loads. Looking at the next slide, we'll show you that when we're in training, we can see changes quite easily by just measuring velocity on every single rep of every single lift. For strength exercises, if we see a consistent increase of about 0.05 meters per second at the heavier loads over 70%, we can pretty safely say that that's about a 2 to 2.5 increase in percent 1 rep max with that athlete without ever even testing 1 rep max. So as you could see there, the example I gave with the 285 pounds, we could see that that's a pretty big increase in his strength, maybe not his 1 rep max, but at least his max at that specific velocity. When we train, we'll use average velocities for our strength work. We'll use peak velocities for any power work. So if we're doing Olympic lifting, cleans, clean pulls, any kind of snatches, any kind of Olympic lifting, we typically look at peak velocities. With jumping, we look at peak velocities. So for a peak velocity increase, 3 to 5% is if you see a velocity of an increase in velocity of about 3 to 5% at any particular load, you can equate that to an improvement in speed and power. Looking at the next slide, we'll look at how we implement jump testing. This is one of my favorite parts of this of using velocity is putting on the push band and having our athletes jump at the beginning of every workout. So typically for us, we'll do it 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We'll use the counter movement jump, say Monday, the RSI on Wednesday, and the squat jump on Friday. And I'll mix that up throughout the off season. We'll change the days that we use each one of them, but it's typically one of the first things that we'll do in our workouts. Usually just have an athlete do 2-3 sets, 3 to 5 reps, just to kind of get an idea of where they're at. So it gives us a real good indicator of readiness, helps us determine fatigue and recovery. So if we have an athlete come in and we know what their best jump is, or we know where they were the week before, we can see if they've recovered properly, if they're fatigued that day, if we maybe need to make some adjustments to training, just simply based off of readiness to train from what their jump height was. We can use it to determine adaptations to training. So if I get an athlete and we're in week 4 of a phase and my plan was to taper the following week and then move on to a new phase, but his jumps went through the roof in week 4, I might do another week of training with that athlete. Obviously other factors, how is the lifting that week and so forth. So it means he's still adapting to the training. So we don't necessarily want to move on just yet. And we'll use it to adjust daily training. So what we'll do with our athletes is they'll come in, they'll do a jump, sometimes a little bit of a warm up and then a jump. Sometimes it's the first thing we have them do. Then in between jumps, we'll do some kind of a warm up. We'll do some activation work. We'll maybe implement things like RPR or various different things that we use in our training to kind of try to wake guys up, activate them, get them ready to go, do another jump. And let's see if that number went up. So if it goes up, great, they're activated, they're warmed up, they're ready to go. So it gives us a good indication of if our warm up is working. If they jumped poor in their first jump, poor in their second jump, poor in their third jump, we know that athlete's probably pretty fatigued that day. So we might want to make some adjustments to our training and maybe deload them a little bit that day, decrease some of the weight, decrease the volume of the workout or whatnot. And the other thing, Cedric mentioned the leaderboard earlier. The leaderboard is awesome. I put a leaderboard up every single day. We typically just use it with the jumps. We'll use it with a few other things, but it creates competition. And the boys absolutely love it. So we'll have guys training all day long. Even our younger guys will jump every day and compare themselves to our pro guys. And guys will come in and train at 7, 8 in the morning. do their jumps. The guys that come in at 4 in the afternoon get to see that leaderboard and see what they have to shoot for, and get to see what the other athletes did that day and have a goal there. So looking at the next slide, just shows you, this is just an example of what we would get for data from a counter movement jump. So this athlete did 2 reps, 26.8 inches was his jump. But another thing I really love about this is it tells us the meter per second in peak velocity. So I know that at 26 inches, which is a good jump for this athlete, is 3.66 meters per second. So in training, I might do another variation of a counter movement jump. And I can then tell this athlete, hey, your goal is to try and get over 3.5 meters per second, because we know you can jump that based on your jump testing. So then it gives them a real target to shoot for and creates that intent in their training. So looking at the next slide, you'll just see a comparison of I mentioned before, squat jumps versus counter movement jumps. So counter movement jumps are always going to have a higher number. Squat jumps are a little bit lower. But what I really like about this, so if we actually had this on the app, we could scroll through this and see every jump that this athlete ever did and really get an idea of what the improvements are, or if they're in a down phase or really need a recovery or whatnot, because maybe they're dropping off on their jumps. So couple things to point out. If we look at the counter movement jump arm swing here, so this athlete comes in July 3rd, jumps 21.3 or 0.2 inches. Okay, we do some work in between. We do a second jump, third jump. He stays about the same. So pretty decent that day. For whatever reason, it was 2 weeks later, so maybe he missed a workout. Maybe we gave him some time off. He comes in the next Friday, July 17th, jumps 21.7. Okay, right around where he was before. Pretty good. We do a little warm up, a little activation work with him. He jumps 23. We're like, wow, that's it's a big improvement. Okay, what happened? We do something else. Let's do it again. Let's confirm that. He does it again. He jumps 23.7. Perfect. Training is working. Whatever we did is working with that athlete. And you can see the similar thing with squat jumps on the other side here. Now you'll notice with the squat jumps, this athlete's best jump, the 19.3 at the top, that may have been before July 16th. Highly unlikely. It was probably after. If I had the app open, I could scroll through it and see it. But we could see if it was before and then he had these really low jumps, that's a big indicator of something's going on. Maybe there's nutrition's poor. Maybe he's not getting enough sleep. Maybe he's starting to get to the point where he's overtrained. So we can use that to make those adjustments to our training. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a leaderboard. So just Cedric showed this earlier. We will put this up every single day. It scrolls through, I think the top 13 shows up, but along the bottom, it scrolls through every single athlete. So guys can really see where they are compared to not only their peers. I put it up for every single athlete. So like I said before, my young guys jumping against my pro guys, it's a jump, it's your body weight. So we can create that competition there, and it's a lot of fun for guys to get to see what other guys did and try to match them or beat them. So moving on to the next slide. So I want to talk now about how I actually program and implement it into the programming. There's a lot here. There's a lot of different ways that we can do it. I'm just going to highlight a few things. So I use the portal. Now this is talking more about my older athletes. So guys that are 17, 18 years old at the youngest, all the way up to, whatever 40-year-old pro who's about to retire. So so we use the portal to design all our programs. A few things that we can do in there. We can assign a percent 1RM. So although the beauty of using velocity is you don't really need to know the 1RM, you just make your adjustments off of velocity, but I can assign a percent 1RM and associate a velocity with that. For the athlete in the workout, this is what we want you moving it at, or what we want your best rep to be. So we can assign a best rep velocity. We can assign velocity losses, and I'll show you examples of all this. We can suggest rep ranges. So we want the work today to be within this rep range. If you're over it, we go up in weight. If you're below it, we go down in weight. It helps auto-regulate the training. I will quite often not even tell an athlete how many reps I want them to do. I'll give them a range. I'll say, this should be anywhere between 4 and 8 reps. As soon as you drop your velocity, you're done the set. So you'll get some athletes. It's great for auto-regulation of each specific athlete, because you'll get some athletes that might only get 4 or 5 reps every time, and you get others that can push through and get 8. Whereas if you told that athlete to stop at 4, he probably didn't get much of a training effect because he was still moving 4 reps pretty fast and didn't fatigue yet, depending what your goal is, right? You can adjust loads based off their best rep velocity. So if you tell them this is what we want your best rep to be, usually your best rep is your first or second rep. If it's not, the athlete's pretty inconsistent with their lifting, so you got other things you need to correct there. You can adjust loads based off of last rep velocity. So I'll talk about that and show you some of that. So if we know what their last rep is, we can kind of give you an idea of how many reps they had left in the tank. Use it to teach technique. I'll show you an example of that, and use it to teach intent. So looking at the next slide, you'll see how so this is an example of how I would program it in the portal. And then once I program this, I just assign it to an athlete and it comes up on the app for them to use. So looking at a particular squat exercise here. So I programmed in here a specific velocity loss. So a 20% velocity loss from their best rep. So hopefully their best rep is their first or second rep, and then they gradually drop off. I also gave a percentage in here of 1RM for this athlete. So once I put a percentage in, it comes up on the app with a weight that they should be lifting. So 65, 70, 75, 75 is kind of what we did here. And as far as the best rep velocity, I put in the coach's notes, I want your best rep velocity to be 0.57. So if their best rep is over 0.57, they can go up in weight. If it's below, they might need to drop down a little bit. So I'll show you an example here. And we want this guy to be between 4 and 8 reps is where we want them to be. So looking at the next slide, you can see on the right, so this would be maybe set 1. So they did 8 reps. Now, remember I said 4 to 8 reps. So I'll tell this athlete, you're either stopping at 8 reps or you're stopping when your velocity drops 20%. So you can see here that I highlighted the very last rep. So the very last rep, if we look at the average velocity at the bottom on the right, it's 0.66 meters per second. So at 0.66 meters per second, we know that this is still pretty light for this athlete. 0.57 is what I said roughly I want your best rep to be, so that should have been the first rep. But a good consistent set, gradually dropped off. So this gives me an indication this guy's a pretty good lifter, good intent, pushes hard on every rep. He's not all over the place. So he did 235 here. So now we say, okay, let's go up to 295. So we go up to 295. Remember, we want to be between 4 and 8 reps. Want the best rep to be somewhere around 0.57, and we want to go till they drop 20%. So this guy here, same athlete, just went up in weight. 0.54 was his best rep, so it was on his second rep, and he goes until he drops off, and then he kind of hits a wall and drops off. So you see that last rep dropped off pretty hard. So it's a 38% velocity loss, but I don't get overly concerned with that unless unless like he did 2 or 3 reps at that loss. Then we get a little bit concerned. It's, I wouldn't say concerned, but it's more of a loss than we wanted in there. But this is a really good set. So now with this athlete, that's about a perfect weight for him to be lifting for what we're trying to accomplish here. So we might do 1 or 2 more sets at this weight. And like Cedric said, we can make the changes within our program too. I might have 3 sets programmed, but we might have not got to an actual hard set until they got to their 3rd set. So I might actually put in 1 or 2 more sets based on this as well. Go ahead to the next slide. And then, so here's an example of bench press, very similar, same concept. We put a 30% velocity loss. You'll find that it's easier for an athlete to do more work with the upper body, work at a higher velocity loss. If I put in a 30-40% velocity loss for a squat, that would crush a guy. For a bench press, it's pretty good. I might even go 35, sometimes 40%, and make it really, really challenging for them, make them really push hard. So 4 to 10 reps, best rep 5.5. So looking at the next slide, we'll see how same idea with bench press. One thing I want to point out here, so I put in, actually with the bench press, I did a little different than the squats. I put in 2 warm-up sets, and then I put 3 sets at 75% after that. So the 2 warm-up sets, this would be one of the warm-up sets here. So you can see they moved their last rep at 0.6 at 160 or 145 pounds. We go up to 175, pretty good set, just like we saw with the squats. If this wasn't a warm-up set and I told this athlete I wanted to do 4 to 10 reps and he stopped at 6, and he's still going, that would just be an indicator for me to kind of, give him a kick in the butt and say, look, you could have kept going. You had way more left in the tank. Go until you either hit 10 reps or until you fail. So looking at the next slide here. So this is now looking at using the last rep of the set. So with the stuff that we did before, we talked about using the first rep. So using the best rep to work off of. Here, we can work off of the last rep and kind of give an athlete an idea of how many reps they would have had left in the bag. And that kind of gives us an idea of how much weight we could have went up by. So the nice thing about this chart is we have reps in reserve on the left and rate of perceived exertion on the right. So what we find using this chart, usually we try to add it up to about 10. So if a guy has finishes his set, last rep is around 0.52 meters per second, we can guess that he has about 5 reps left in the tank. If we ask that athlete, hey, what was that out of 10? He'd probably tell me a 5. Okay, so it gives us a pretty good indicator. And then if we were on the other end of the spectrum, we were moving it at about 0.25 meters per second for the squat, that tells us there's no way that athlete has a rep left in the tank. And usually I'll ask a guy that. I'll say, okay, hey, how'd that feel? What, could you have done one more rep? And they're like, no, that's maybe one more, but I don't think so. I think that was a max. We'll look at his velocity, and sure enough, it'll be right around 0.3. So we know that he had nothing left. So next slide is going to show you same concept for upper body. Kind of get a little chart it's nice to have these charts to kind of work off of when you're programming. But again, we have profiles for our athletes that helps as well to kind of know where they're at. One thing to keep in mind here, if an athlete's minimum velocity threshold, so let's say for a bench press, it's 0.20 and they move a weight at about 0.25. Well, you can pretty closely guess that they probably had 1 rep left, maybe 2. So if you look here, it says 0.03 to 0.06 for each rep in reserve is kind of a good guideline to use. So moving on to the next slide. So this gives us an idea of looking at that last rep velocity. So for set 1 here, this athlete's last rep was 0.35 meters per second. That tells me that he has about 4 reps in reserve, either by looking at the chart or by knowing his minimum velocity. Let's say it's about 0.2, so that we can kind of do the math there. It's about 3 or 4 reps in reserve. And then, so with this athlete, he did 185 pounds. All right, let's go up. Now, in this particular case here, this would be a program where I would have said, stop at 4 reps. We're going heavy today. Okay, we're doing sets of 2 to 4 reps, somewhere in that range. Here's the velocity range I want you to be in. Or we just go till you fail. And then so for example, this guy stops at 4, I know he could probably do about 4 more reps. So I'm like, all right, let's bump this up quite a bit. Let's go up to 215. So we go up to 215. He gets 3 reps. His last rep is 0.21, pretty close to a max. So I say to him, do you have another rep left? And he's probably not. Okay. So using that rate of perceived exertion and that reps in reserve helped us there to kind of auto-regulate the load that athlete was working at. So looking at the next slide here, this is kind of giving us an indication of how to use velocity ranges now. So with the beauty of using velocity, a lot of people think of this, and when I say it to an athlete, I say velocity to an athlete, all they think is speed and power. They don't think about strength. But you can see in here how we can use velocities at a variety of different ranges to train different qualities. So here's a dynamic squat with the bands. I love doing dynamic work with bands because the guy can push right through the top, doesn't have to worry about the bar flying off his back or anything like that. So they get a good push all the way through the movement. I find when we don't have the bands on and they're jump squatting, they kind of slow down at the top, and you can see that a little bit in the velocities. So with this particular exercise, we tell them, hey, we want you between 1 and 1.2. So going to look at his actual output in the next slide. So you can see his first set here, the average of the entire set, the average of all 5. So I'll tell them 5 reps is all I want out of this. The average of all 5 reps was about 1.2. I said I wanted him between 1 and 1.2. So he's at the higher end. So we would tell this athlete, go up. Now you notice there's no load in here. It's band loaded. So it's the strong bands hooked to the cage and hooked to the bar. hard to know what the load is, right? So we don't really put anything in. I usually just put a 0, and the athlete will just remember what strength of band he used. So in this case, if he had a weaker band, we could have increased the band strength, or we just add weight. So this particular athlete he's pretty strong. He had the thick bands on. So we just add some weight. So get him to throw 20 pounds on, so 10 pounds on each side of the bar, and do his next set. Now his set average here was 1.14. This gray line that you see through the back, all the way across the back of the scores there, that's that 1 to 1.2 that we programmed in. So you can see how in the picture on the right, how they're green for 4 out of the 5 of them. So that tells me he's in the zone that I want him to be in for 4 out of the 5 reps. Whereas on the other side, for 4 out of the 5 reps, he was over the zone. So with this particular athlete, adding 20 pounds was good, got him into the 1 to 1.2 that we wanted. I would still probably tell this guy to go up a little bit, because he's still near the top end of that range. And he had 1 rep that was over 1.2. So I would say, hey, let's go a little heavier, and see what you can get on the next one. So moving on to the next slide. I talked earlier about peak velocities versus average velocities. So for Olympic lifting, we'll use peak velocity. So here's a hang clean example. So I'll put in a peak velocity of 1.5 to 1.8 meters per second. Just like squats, bench, everything else, Olympic lifting has a minimum velocity threshold as well. So generally what we find is that 1.5 meters per second peak velocity is kind of the minimum that a guy needs to move the bar at to be able to catch it, providing technique is good. Now that's another issue that we run into with our hockey athletes, is they're not always the best at Olympic lifting. So we'll do a lot of variations, pulls, jump shrugs, things like that. But velocity still works really great for all that stuff. And I'd still use roughly the same numbers. So here we might tell the athlete, okay, be in that range. Let's do anywhere between 4 and 6 reps and go from there. So looking at the next slide, you can see now we're looking at peaks. So now we're looking at the top number here, the top of the bar. So you can see how the bar's got a light shade and a dark shade. The top dark shade, that's your peak velocity. The light shade, your average velocity. So with this particular athlete, looking down at the bottom left, the right-hand picture, and looking down, or the left side picture, looking down at the bottom right of it, you can see that he moved his last rep at 2.19 meters per second. Super fast, super explosive. We want to be 1.5 to 1.8. So we're doing a little heavier cleans on this day. So we would say, okay, let's go up in weight. So this guy did 185. We move him up to 225. Now, something I really want to point out here, this is the one on the left is set 1. The one on the right is set 3, not set 2. I'll show you set 2 in a second. So with set 3, technique was still really, really good. He was over the velocities we wanted him at for the most part. Best rep was 2.10. So we could tell this athlete to go a little bit heavier, but now keeping in mind is how was his technique too. Chances are it was pretty good for this set. If we look at the next slide, this was set 2. So his second set was not very good. So we went 185, bumped it up to 225. You can see here his third rep, his peak was 1.6, and he probably caught that. My guess is reps 1 and 2, he didn't catch it. Okay, he didn't generate enough power, enough velocity to catch the bar, to get it up, to be able to get under it and catch it. If he did, it was probably very ugly and he muscled it up. So it kind of gives us an idea of technique. So in this case, I know this athlete really well. I don't remember the exact day, but I guarantee you, I told him to go back down in weight, but he probably said to me, no, I got it. Like, he's a pretty good lifter. So I said, well, your technique was crap on that set. Look at the velocities. You got to get better, get the bar moving in a straighter line, get through your hips, give him a little coaching feedback. He goes back and does the set you saw before at 225. Absolutely perfect. So, a good coaching cue as well, just based on the velocities that they moved it at, but obviously your eye, and you could see the technique as well. So moving on. So next slide. So this is the last thing we'll talk about here, is using velocity to teach intent. So this is another exercise, an incline dumbbell press. Picture on the left, you can see the velocities are all over the place. So one of the best things about using velocity is you can tell them to push hard every single rep, and you know whether they are or they aren't. What a lot of these athletes will do is they will only push hard enough to lift the weight. They won't, it's, hey, I gotta, this is easy for me. I'm just going to push hard enough to lift it. What we want them to do is push with intent on every single rep. So on the left, 55 pounds, this was week 2 of this particular phase. He was all over the place. You can see his 3rd rep was his best one, but his 4th rep was one of his worst. 5th was good again. 6th was crap. 7th was okay. 8th dropped down. So he was all over the place. Then we cleaned some things up. Maybe we did a few more sets that week. Next week we come in, he actually gets up to 60 pounds and nice and consistent, pushed really hard on rep 1, gradually got fatigued. But you can see here even the last rep was like a 0.43 meters per second, I believe it was. But we would have programmed this athlete. You can see the little gray line in the background across the bar. So somewhere under 4 meters per second. So this is a guy who just didn't want to push himself. Even though he did 7 reps, it was 7 easy reps based off the velocity. The velocities were way, way too high. So we would have said, okay, let's go up. But here's an example of that load that I put in there. I may have programmed that in for him, and I was wrong. I was way off, but velocities will tell me how I need to adjust based on that. So what we'll do a lot of times, we'll use our bench press 1 rep max to give guys an indicator of what they might do on a flat dumbbell press, incline dumbbell press, and so forth. And we'll actually put in an estimated 1 rep max, but it doesn't work for everybody. And that's where velocity is really, really good, because even if I tell a guy, okay, I think your 1 rep max for a flat dumbbell press is 80 pounds, let's do 70 pounds in this workout. He gets in there and is way over the velocity range that I want him to be at. Well, I was wrong. His 1 rep max for the dumbbell is way higher than that. So that's about it. So moving on, next slide. Just thank you very much for the opportunity. I could talk about this stuff all day long. I'm sure there's some questions. We'll answer them. My email address is on there, Instagram. Reach out if you have questions about velocity-based training hockey players. I'm glad to talk shop anytime. Cedric's email's there as well if you have questions about push.
Awesome. Great. Thanks very much, Barry. So before handing over to Marcus, obviously, there's a heap of different technologies out there in terms of velocity-based training. But I guess, what we want to do is obviously outline the push system. We're partnered with Catapult. And obviously, as you can see with all the great work that Barry's doing, he's a very sophisticated user of the push system. So hopefully, the kind of overview of the technology itself, and then obviously that, practical application use of the system was useful and helped spark some ideas. So I'll hand it over to you, Marcus, and we can run with the Q&A.
Yes, great. Thank you. First of all, Barry, Cedric, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Really interesting. Reminder for all the participants, the Q&A is open. Please write your questions and then we take them from there. I'm a bit curious about how's buy-in for the athletes, Barry. I mean, when you introduce VBT or velocity-based training, especially for older athletes, I mean, the younger ones, they just need to buy it. They don't have any choice, right? But the older ones, how do they kind of accept it, and do they understand why it makes so much more sense to work with velocity instead for just looking at the weight on the barbell?
Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. They love it. And you're right. With the older athletes, it takes a little bit of the biggest hurdle with the older athletes is having their phone in their hand. And I'll be the first to say, I hate guys having their phone in their hand in the gym, but we don't always do that. We will sometimes just have it on an iPad. I don't have an iPad on I have 15 squat racks in my gym. I'm not going to put an iPad on every squat rack, but so we have each athlete bring their own phone in. Usually what I'll have to do is tell them, put it on airplane mode so that they don't have their Snapchats and stuff going off all the time. That's the biggest hurdle is some of my older athletes just don't like having their phone when they're training. But as far as understanding the velocity and so forth, I haven't had an issue. You mentioned it in the introduction. I've been using velocity-based training in some extent for a long time. We were always able to measure strength. What's your 1 rep max? Okay, sure. But we were never really able to measure power. So there's always been devices out there, whether it's Tendo or various other devices that we've used in the past, and just used it on our dynamic work. So used it on our cleans or use it on squat jumps. And the guys really like that, because to put weight on your back and jump with it, I'm looking at them saying, hey, that was good or that wasn't good. And they're looking at me saying, well, how the hell do you know? And now with measuring velocity, we know, right? And it creates that competition where they see that. And I think that's the biggest thing with these athletes is they're super competitive. And once you see that ability to make adjustments to your training based off of how the quality of movement, they buy into it right away.
Exactly. Yes, I understand. How do you, during a training session, are you always gonna kind of join or be aside your athletes, or you just maybe join them at the beginning and then after a couple of times they used the system or the tech, you leave them alone and they do the training and you do a post-training review?
No, I'm with in my setting, I'm with my athletes all the time, right? So I'm there for the whole workout. So this is what I get from them now. And I think it's awesome where they, instead of me having to tell them what to do for the adjustments to their weights and so forth, they turn to me and they're like, hey, I just moved that at X such and such velocity. Should I go up? Should I stay? What do you think? And then I start educating them on, okay, where did I want you to be? Kind of like we talked about, what's the range you wanted you to be in? What was your last rep? How many reps do you think you had left? And instead of me just telling them, now they become a little bit educated about how to make those adjustments on their own. But in my world, I'm there with them all the time. Now, in saying that, right now, my gym's closed. We're shut down here due to COVID. So I've got my athletes training online. So that's the other beauty of this. So what I do is all of my athletes have their own push band, or my higher end guys, they have their own push band, so they can actually take it home with them. So some of them have equipment at home. I can program in velocities, and I can open up the app when that kid's training and I can see what he did in his workout and how to make adjustments. It's actually awesome right now because I'll sit here. I'm watching golf today. I'll sit here with my phone, watch golf. I'll get texts from my athletes. I know they're training. I'll get a text. Hey, take a look at that velocity of that last set. Should I go up? Should I stay there? What should I do? And I'll quickly look, send them a quick text. It takes 10 seconds for me to take a look and see without even being in the gym and seeing the athlete. I can use velocity to guide their workout. Now, obviously there's a ton of other factors there. What was the technique like, how, and so forth. So things that, coach's eye I'll never replace technology with my eye, or for my eye, but yeah.
Sure. We have a question from Philip. We're going to answer it live, right? Do you use different range meter per seconds depending on what periodization phase you're in with your athletes during off season to match the right effect on their training? If yes, what is the ranges you want them to aim for when you want, for example, maximum strength, accelerative strength, or starting strength?
Yeah, 100%. So early in the year, so you'll see those velocity cutoffs there. And the reason I put those velocity cutoffs in early in the year, and we'll use that a lot in season as well, but early in the off season, we're not going to jump into heavy lifting right off the bat. I mean, these guys hadn't lifted for a while. So depending what we're trying to accomplish. So just a simple answer. If we're trying to train, say, hypertrophy with an athlete, I want them going to fatigue, to failure. So we'll put a loss in there so they don't stop early, so they keep pushing. That might be a 30-40% velocity loss. The velocity range in that case might be somewhere between 0.4 and 0.7 meters per second. And it depends on the exercise. So if you remember, I talked about minimum velocity thresholds for an exercise. So if we're talking max strength and I want to train max strength for a squat, I want those velocities to be awfully close to 0.3 meters per second. So I might do 1 to 3 reps, and it might be rep 1.4, rep 2.35, rep 3.3. They're done. That's heavy lifting. And that's our max strength training. For bench press, it would be similar. It might be 0.2 to 0.3 meters per second. So that would be later in the off season when we're into our strength phases. You saw in there with the Olympic lifting with the power stuff. So we put the velocities much higher. So depending what we're trying to train and how we periodize our program, absolutely. That's the beauty of the velocity. I can simply, instead of saying, okay, this phase we're working at 70% of 1 rep max. Now we're going up to 80. Now we're going up to 90. I can say, okay, here we're going to work at around 0.5 meters per second. Now we're moving to 0.4. Now we're moving down closer to 1 RM at 0.3. So similar concept to using percent 1-rep maxes, but the beauty of it is I can make adjustments within their workout. I mean, everybody knows if I tested my squats every single day, it's not going to be the same. Even if I tested them every week, my 1-rep max is not going to be the same. And that's the nice thing about velocities. We can make those adjustments on a daily basis. But to answer the question, yes, that's exactly how we use it, is to periodize and give them different velocity ranges to target different metrics or different training qualities.
Oh, great. When they go back to the clubs, are they continuing with velocity-based training, or is it like they do velocity-based training with you and then they skip it for the rest of the time and then they come back to you? How is the kind of the setup within the hockey clubs?
Yeah, no, they don't really do it a lot. Here's what happens with my athletes, my really keen. Now I don't need to design the program. They can use velocities in whatever program their team is giving them. So even though I don't have a program in the app, Cedric mentioned this, they can open up the app. So let's say their team program squats for them that day. They can open up the app, just click on squats and measure it. Even though their team's not using it, they can still use it. So my really keen guys will use it. What I find that they actually do a lot of is they'll use it with jumping on their own. So, and like I said, it gives us a real good indicator of how they're feeling and how they're recovering and how their readiness is just by measuring their jumps on a regular basis. And then they have all that data. So they might do a jump before their workout, do a team workout, do their jumps the next day, see how they adapted to that training. But we're getting there. We're getting to that point where even if the teams don't use it, these athletes are starting to realize the value in it and using it themselves.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. Amazing. I don't have any questions at the moment. Cedric, anything you want to add, or Barry, something you want to add?
Cedric, anything?
Frozen in time.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I think it's an absolute great tool to measure velocity and to just give you a different view on how to train your athletes and how to how to make adjustments to your program and in real time. It's the data is phenomenal. Even if you didn't use it constantly all the time and you just worked it in, you're doing a phase, maybe you do it week 1 and week 4 and just to see how things change. There's lots of different ways to use it.
Definitely. I think, for me, it makes totally sense. We start measuring on ice training load, for example, then it definitely makes sense to have a wearable which captures like the load which we put on the players or the athletes during gym training or strength and conditioning sessions as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll mention one more thing about in-season training, even though I don't do a lot of it, but I will do some with our athletes. What I really like about it for in-season training is you can push an athlete as hard as you want to, as hard as you need to. So a lot of times with in-season, we're afraid to lift, we're afraid to do too much because we don't want to make them sore or make them tired. Well, the nice thing about this is I could put a cutoff velocity in there and say, hey, don't go below 0.5. So you might just do 3 or 4 reps and stay in that high velocity range. Well, guys aren't going to get 2 things that make them sore, right? Is heavy lifting and high volume. So if you can control the volume and control how heavy they actually go, then you're still going to get a good training effect, or at least maintain. In my mind, there's nothing worse than a guy who's a 400-pound squatter squatting 135 pounds all winter because that's what everybody on his team's doing. He gets absolutely nothing out of that. So, and now it doesn't have to be a squat, it could be a split squat, could be a lunge, whatever, you name the exercise. But if we know that his velocity, should be somewhere around that 0.5 meters per second, and that that's a, whatever load he can push at that, well, why wouldn't you, push him a little bit so he can maintain? Because that's easy for him. Whereas somebody else, that 135 might be hard. They might only move that at 0.5. So that's the beauty of the in-season stuff, is you can really control fatigue and volume.
Yeah. And I think, just to kind of piggyback on what Barry said, obviously from the performance improvement or the training prescription standpoint, that's kind of one aspect. But, I kind of mentioned earlier, it is about athlete buy-in, but it's also about athlete trust. Okay. So, I mean, if you've got, with this objective feedback, with this objective loading prescription, as well as the performance improvements that you can achieve through this approach, not only are you making your athletes better, but you're communicating more effectively with your athletes, and ultimately you're also just building their trust in you as a coach, and obviously that what you do works and has the desired effect, which is obviously ultimately making them better hockey players on the ice. So I think that's a really, really important kind of concept that gets overlooked sometimes about this too.
For sure. Another question from Alexander. Is there any difference in the application of VBT between goalies and forwards defense? Have you experienced or noticed any positional differences?
Well, I think you're going to see differences in every athlete. That's why we do a profile on them, whether they're, typically our goalies aren't as strong, aren't as explosive as our, as some of our other players, but that's an individual thing. When I train hockey players, I look at it as I'm trying to make them a better athlete. I mean, I've played the game. I know that a squat's not going to make me score more goals. It's about making them a better athlete. So do we see differences? Absolutely, but not necessarily by position from a VBT standpoint. More just by athleticism. I mean, you'll get some goalies that are really good athletes. And again, I'll go back to the jumping. This is where jumping really, really shows up well, is we actually find that our goalies don't jump that well. They're not that explosive compared to our other players. Now, I'll also say this, and it's going to be the same on every team. I don't have that many goalies that I train. It's primarily forwards and defensemen, right? It's players. I mean, that's, there's two goalies on every team. So how many am I going to actually have in the gym? So I don't have as much data on them, but again, individual differences, absolutely. You see it all the time. And that's kind of the nice thing about it, right? So instead of, it allows those guys to make those adjustments to their training just automatically based on how they're moving or how well they push on a particular exercise. But yeah, simple answer. We see a difference for sure. I typically find that our goalies aren't, they're just not as explosive or as athletic as some of our other players are.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, guys, I think it's a little bit past 6 o'clock at my place now. So we went over just like 9 to 10 minutes, which I think is no problem at all. I give it a couple of seconds. Maybe there comes another question in. Otherwise, I again would like to thank you guys, Barry, Cedric. Amazing. It was a pleasure having you on this webinar. So we have one more webinar left. It's next Tuesday, same time, same place, same moderator, and another question which we can take before we stop. It's from Jeff Watson and another one. Information and it's just a feedback, which is nice, which I would like to give to you as well. So no question, but information and presentation was excellent. Appreciate the depth and the knowledge and multiple applications. Jeff, thank you. And Robert Anderson, excellent presentation. Thanks. Thank you guys as well. Yeah. Again, next week, Tuesday, we have the last part of the webinar series together with Freddy Sjögren from Malmö Redhawks. And promise a very interesting topic. So I think it is worth to tune in again. You're going to face me